I'm Rachel with Cookie Jar Crimes. Today we're going to be talking about someone you probably haven't really heard about. But we're going to start off talking about someone you probably have heard about. Her name was Georgia Tann. She lived from 1891 to 1950. She was an American child trafficker. She operated the Tennessee Children's Home Society. It was an adoption agency in Memphis, Tennessee. Well, she used the unlicensed home as a front for her black market baby scheme. She did this from the 1920s until the 1950s. There was a state investigation into instances of adoption fraud, and it caused the institution to be closed. Tann, however, died of cancer before the investigation made its findings public. You've probably heard of her, but you probably have not heard of Ruby Hightower. There's not much to find about her. She's from the same town as the infamous Phantom Killer, Texarkana. She was born in 1883. She was born in Arkansas. Her dad's name is James Shelley, and her mom's name is Julia Shelley. She had an older brother, Edgar Shelley. She had two younger brothers, William Shelley and Sandifer Shelley. They called him Sam. And she married a man named Charles Hightower. She married him in 1906. And they had two children together. They had Beatrice Ruby Hightower. She was born in 1908. And they had Bevy B. Hightower. She was born in 1911. Now, Charles Hightower has another child listed as Charlie May Hightower. And she was born in 1908 as well. So obviously, this child is not Ruby Hightower's natural child because she was born just a few days after Ruby's first child. And Charlie May is not listed as Ruby's child. She's only listed as Charles Hightower's child. If they would have adopted her, then she would be listed as Ruby's child. So I'm thinking Charles must not have been a faithful husband. There's no mom mentioned for Charlie May. That's quite sad. The Beatrice, their oldest child, went on to marry Lauren Roark in 1946, and they had one child. Her name was Elizabeth Roark, and Brown was her married name. She was called Betty. That's what her nickname was. She was born in 1948, and she lived to 2007. As far as I know, Betty was Ruby's only grandchild. Now, when Ruby Hightower died, she left this trunk to her granddaughter, Betty. And this is where our story begins to get interesting. Betty Brown never really thought to look in the trunk. I mean, it was just a bunch of papers. It was like some medical papers and documents, but she never really dug through them or she never really found interest in digging through them. She began to receive telephone calls, though, asking her for information about Ruby. She began to dig into the papers. What she found out was startling. Brown had always known her grandmother as this kind, sweet, just grandmotherly type person. But this, what she found in the trunk, it was like learning about a stranger, someone she didn't know. In the trunk, Brown found a Texarkana Gazette article. It was from August the 8th, 1950. And this is what the article read. Mrs. Ruby Hightower, operator of a health home, was charged today with kidnapping a newborn baby from a young unwed mother. District Attorney Maxwell Welch said the baby was taken at birth from a Texarkana hospital. The 16-year-old mother and her parents who want to rear the child have received no satisfaction in their demands that Mrs. Hightower hand over the baby. Welch said the girl went in the health home for the last 3 months of confinement. He quoted the young mom as saying she had paid $250 for room and board for that period. She left the health home and she went into the hospital for the birth of her child. Later, she came back to the health home, but the baby was not moved with her. And another teenage girl had also charged Hightower with kidnapping her baby, but Hightower was never indicted. Among the yellowed articles that Betty Brown found in the trunk was an article by a man named Ernest A. Mittler. It was from Look magazine, 1954. Ernest Mittler, he was an intimidating figure. He was a New York City district attorney in the 1950s. He conducted a lot of undercover work in black market baby operations, and he exposed many of these black market baby rings. One contributing factor to these illegal adoptions was the desire of many couples, and even today, to have a child of their own, a baby of their own. But the struggle to adopt through an agency can be a struggle. It can be unbelievably hard. And so that was a contributing factor then. A second contributing factor is the amount of unmarried girls under 20 who would become pregnant. And that was very unaccepted in the day. To be pregnant and unmarried, you were very just kind of shut out of life. If that happened to you, you were looked at horribly. So these girls, they needed help. These ladies like Georgia Tann, Ruby Hightower would have scouts seeking to help these girls. And so they would offer them what they needed. They would offer them secrecy, safety, and medical care. And sometimes the girls actually wanted to put their babies up for adoption. They wanted them to be able to have a normal life and to be raised by a couple. But a lot of times they were tricked and their babies taken against their will. I'm going to read some of the article to you by Ernest Mittler, what he wrote in the Look 1954 magazine. This is what Betty Brown read. She had no clue anything about her grandmother. She had no clue about any of this, and she's just reading these articles. That would be tough, to find this kind of stuff out about her grandmother, and she's not there. You can't talk to her. You can't, what was going on? Why did you do this? You can't get any kind of closure from that. So she's just reading this stuff and wow, had no clue that her grandmother had done any of this. Think about that as we read this, that Betty Brown's reading this and she's like, what? So this is his words. Last August, on information received, I visited the Hightower Health Home in Texarkana, Texas. I presented myself to Mrs. Ruby Hightower as a fellow who wanted to adopt a baby. I found a classic example of the commercialized placement of babies, tailored to fit the desires of anybody with money enough to pay the bill. The health home, a rather ordinary house. It's in a residential section. Upstairs, a few old folks are boarded. Mrs. Hightower has an apartment in town where she sometimes houses expectant mothers or people waiting to get babies. She probably is about 70. She can be described as loquacious. That means talkative. But she's pleasant. When I told Mrs. Hightower I wanted a baby, she looked at me fondly and said, "Too bad you weren't here a couple months ago. I had a baby with the biggest brown eyes, just like yours, and the biggest little old head." I guess she thought Ernest Mittler's head was big. I assumed it would take all my legal guile to wheedle information from her, but all it really took was my physical presence. Mrs. Hightower got people babies, and she was proud of it. She indicated familiarity with ways of circumventing adoption laws. She was completely open about it all. I asked where her girls come from. Everywhere, sir. Every state in the Union, I think. They hear about me, and they come on to Mrs. Hightower. So do the adoption folks. Get most of my customers from right here in Texas. But I remember 2 from Michigan, 1 from Chicago, 2 from San Francisco, and a real nice couple out of Los Angeles. She told me she really liked me, and she'd try to get me a baby. Not right away, of course. I've got a list of applications as long as your arm. How would we arrange it? She spread her hands in the gesture that says, "It's up to you, but it's easy." And she outlined the possibilities. This is the best way. A girl comes to me from Arkansas. She's pregnant. We'll say her name is Janet Jones. Well, I'll board her, and when her time comes, she goes into the hospital under your wife's name. The birth certificate would be drawn as if my wife, and he says here I'm a bachelor, so he didn't really have a wife, but this is how it would work. The birth certificate would be drawn as if my wife had given natural birth, and I would take the baby away. This would eliminate all investigation and adoption procedure, but of course, it's clearly illegal in Texas and elsewhere. Of course, they fingerprint the mother over on the Arkansas side, Mrs. Hightower added. But that don't make any difference. They hardly ever investigate the prints, once in a million. There's another way of doing it, she continued. It's a little more complicated. The girl has the baby under any old name she wants. You pick up the baby outside of the hospital. I can't let you go in the hospital. They'd suspect you right away. You pick up the baby and you take it home. You take along the birth certificate. About 6 months later, you adopt the child in your home state. Tell the investigators the girl gave you the baby to look after, and she just never came back for it. You leave my name out of it. They'll check around here, but you tell them the girl lived with Mrs. M. I fix it up, so Mrs. M, she stands by the story. She always does that. So does the girl. That leaves me out. No one knows you got the baby through me. I wondered aloud whether perhaps the sovereign states of Texas and Arkansas might object. She looked at me with a stern eye. Mr. What'd you say your name was? I control between 250 to 350 votes around here, and I do not fail to put them out of office if they cross me. I asked her if the welfare agencies bothered her. Not much. They suspect what I'm doing, but you see, I'm out of it when the actual transferring is done. I just get folks together. When the welfare people come around, I just chase them away. We talked a while about the competition, which apparently is heavy in that part of the country. I later met some of the competition. It was hard to get enough girls, and sometimes they were ungrateful wretches. That's what Ruby Hightower said. A couple had me arrested for kidnapping their babies after I helped them out of a real jam. Said I had gotten $10,000 apiece for their kids, and they wanted it. Threw it out of court. The judges said, "This woman," meaning me, "has done more for her county than any woman I know." And we came down to the cost. Never had one over $600, and I've had them as low as $350. Now, in today's money, $600 would be around $6,700, and $350 would be about $3,900 in today's money. Ernest Mittler continues, "Would she mail me some information on the subject?" "I don't mail nothing," replied the lady who had done so much for her county. I asked her what my wife should say to neighbors when we returned home with a baby. Best thing to do is move. As for your friends, tell them anything. Don't worry, it will look like you anyhow. Mrs. Hightower is not unique. She operates in a common pattern. She ignores the mother's rights and the rights of the baby. She serves a customer. Her existence depends on the fact that there's no interstate control over non-Texas placements and on her ability to conceal the operation. In the same article at the beginning of it, Ernest Mittler speaks of meeting a woman who had just been released from jail. She had passed a bad check, and she was arrested for it. She said, "No more bad checks for me. I'm going back to selling babies. It's the best racket going." As this woman who bounced rubber checks said, "There's no obstacle in the other states to prevent concealment from the court of the facts that the baby was bought in Texarkana. Under the usual adoption procedure, a judge in any jurisdiction is the last man to know the truth in this kind of a transaction. It's not that he's lazy. He's just confined to the information in the papers submitted to the court, including the report made by the investigator, either a social agency or private individual. If, with the collusion of the parties involved, they falsify the facts to the investigator and in turn to the court, the judge unknowingly sanctifies a black market operation. Getting a baby through the black market may take some time and travel, but there's available a package deal by telephone." And this is still Mittler saying this. After Ernest Mittler wrote the article, Ruby Hightower argued that the nature of this discussion was taken out of context. Jane Beckerdite, she wrote about Ruby Hightower in an article in the Texarkana Gazette in April 12th, 1998. It was titled, "Did Local Healthcare Provider Once Sell Babies on the Side? Living Legacies Seek Answers." Ernest Mittler died February 12th, 2002, but at the time of the 1998 article, he was alive and well, although it had been 44 years since he had spoken with Ruby Hightower. He could recall with great detail his conversation with her. Mittler stated that after investigating thousands of cases, it was common practice for adoption dealers just to tell moms their babies had died. Mittler said he had taped everything that Ruby Hightower told him. Wouldn't it be nice to have those tapes? He said she was a very blunt person. She wasn't sophisticated. "I do believe that she did exploitation of the people in her home, and I think it was well known in the community." Mittler was interviewed over the telephone from his New York apartment. He said he believes that Hightower was not in the black market baby business for money alone. She liked the attention. "I don't think it was just greed," he said. "I think she liked having a certain amount of power. I think Mrs. Hightower was pleased to have people come there. There's a lot of attention you get from making arrangements from people who are craving a child. I think she had a good feeling about being liked and well connected." Betty Brown and one of her friends said that they found what they believed to be Hightower's private journal. And in the journal, Hightower maintained her innocence. This is an excerpt from her journal. "Since the early 1930s, I've been accused of being an abortionist, a bootlegger dope seller. I'm not guilty of any sort of abortions. I'm not guilty of any misuse of any sort of medicines. I'm not guilty of any sort of liquor dealing, nor am I guilty of any sort of black market. I have protected the good name of many girls and women by getting them on the road to right living," Hightower wrote. "I'm aware there's been an undercurrent of gossip these 20 years regarding those ugly stories, and I'm sorry. But there's nothing I could do to stop gossipers. I know if any of it had been true, I would have been in the penitentiary. I felt sure my public felt the same." Hightower had attempted to sue Look magazine and the Texarkana Gazette, but she eventually dropped the suits. There were those who had to live life wondering where their child was, if their child was okay, or the other end of that, and just wondering, is my mom okay? Or is my dad okay? And also just wondering, did my mom think I died? I mean, how sad is that? It's really sad. I don't know if I'm going to say this name right, but it's Chetene, Chetene Gooch. She said that she was actually sold by Hightower. She was only a few days old and she was sold to a Linden, Texas couple for $500. Her mom wanted a baby really bad, and a friend told her mom about Ruby Hightower. Her parents drove to Texarkana. They went in the Hightower home. Her dad gave $500 to Ruby Hightower, and she gave him a baby, Teen Gooch. Another woman from Foreman, Arkansas, said she gave birth to a baby girl, May 16, 1954. She was told that her baby died. Years later, her dying aunt revealed the baby was alive. She went to St. Michael's to look for her records. She had registered there under a different name because she was a teenager and unmarried, and she was poor. She later found a live birth certificate with her name on it. It listed her as married. Her mom and grandmother both worked for Ruby Hightower at the time she gave birth. She believes Hightower sold her daughter. Many other women believe the babies they had at Meagher Hospital were adopted through some kind of alliance with Hightower after they were told their babies had died. Christus St. Michael is the hospital in Texarkana. It started off as Michael Meagher Hospital. Later on, it changed as it grew. Clarine Greiser, she said that many people were involved with the loss of her baby. Right after she gave birth to her baby, she could hear her baby crying. She said her little girl had thick black hair and long little fingernails. On October 2nd, 1946, she delivered baby Patricia at 2:30 a.m. at Michael Meagher Hospital. She said she watched as her daughter lay in the glass incubator. But later on, they came in and told her, we got to put you to sleep for a minor surgery. We need to get the placenta out because she hadn't delivered it. Or that's what she was told. When she woke up, she was told, oh, your little girl, she was born dead. Mrs. Greiser never saw baby Patricia again. A year after Greiser had Patricia, she had another little baby girl, and her name was Sheila. Well, Sheila made it her mission to find her sister. Sheila's mom tried for years to get a birth, death, or stillborn certificate on her child. Years of writing to the hospital and vital records produced nothing. Sheila began writing letters, but the hospital told her mom had never had a child there. They're like, your mom's never even been a patient here. After much persistence, the hospital finally verified that her mom had been a patient at Michael Meagher Hospital. They finally produced a stillborn certificate. Brian still believed that her mom's baby was somehow given to Ruby Hightower and sold. It was said that Ruby Hightower only sold babies who came from poor families or unwed mothers. Well, Greiser was married when she gave birth, but she was poor. So what made Brian even more confident that her sister didn't die at birth comes from stories that she had heard told about the day that Patricia was buried in Canton, Texas. Her father and aunt went to the funeral home to pick up the casket. It was already shut, and they told her father, don't open the casket, it needs to stay shut. The baby was too bruised for him to see. Well, Brian was finally able to convince a judge to order her sister's grave exhumed. The grave had some rusty hinges, some nails, and some rotten wood, but one thing was missing. There was no baby in that grave. Of course, Greiser wasn't shocked. She knew her baby was alive. Was this the work of Ruby Hightower? We may never know the truth, but we do know that Clarine Greiser's baby lived with someone, somewhere. My mom, she was born at Pine Street Hospital in Texarkana. She was born on November 30th, 1949. She had 3 older brothers, all born to A.D. Arnold and Stella Arnold. I like to call them Granddad and Mimi. Stella Arnold was born in 07. That's 1907. She married my granddad on December 23rd, 1936. And they were married in Miller, Arkansas. They lived in Texarkana, Texas. Well, in 1941, they were excited. She was pregnant. This was their first baby. His name was Arthur Gordon. He was born on November 23rd, 1941. He was born at 6 a.m. at Pine Street Hospital. He was born on a Sunday morning. Unfortunately, my Mimi would never get to hold him. She didn't even get to see him. My Mimi had waited 9 months to meet this baby. She never got to see him or hold him. They were told that he was stillborn. My granddad said he could hear his son crying. Stillborn babies don't cry. He also said the nurse and the doctor were in an all-fired hurry to get out of there. He thought they were having a fling. My Mimi and my granddad were never allowed to see Arthur Gordon again. They did see and bury a casket. My Mimi had another baby, Anderson Dale. He was born July 28, 1944. And he was the light of her life. A sweet baby boy. She could hold him. She could cuddle him. She could sing to him and rock him and read to him. They rushed him to the hospital on March the 8th, 1946. I believe he was having a seizure. I'm not exactly sure of the details. When they returned home, they were empty-handed and broken-hearted. She would again have another baby. This baby's name was Rory Charles. He was born April 1947. Rory Charles was stillborn. One of her family members, knowing about the lack of closure that they had gotten with their first child, took pictures of Anderson Dale and Rory Charles in their caskets. In 1949, my Mimi once again became pregnant. This time would be different. It would be a wonderful, joyous occasion. My mom brought such joy and happiness to her adoring parents. She was beautiful, smart, sweet, and healthy. She was a blessing to anyone who ever knew her. When I was older, my mom told me she believed her oldest brother was never buried in that grave. I don't know if he is or not, and I don't even know if he'd still be alive today. But if so, I'd love to meet him. One more thing I found interesting about Ruby Hightower is that her granddaughter, Ruby Elizabeth Brown, Betty Brown, that was Beatrice Ruby Roark's daughter. She was born June 15th, 1948. But she was not born to Beatrice. She was adopted by Beatrice. I just find that a little interesting. One of my theories as to why, just after researching to why maybe Ruby Hightower got into this, was if her husband had Charlie May with another girl, maybe an unwed girl probably, then maybe that spurred her on to either do this to help girls like that maybe. Maybe it was a vengeful thing, like to hurt them. I don't know. I don't know her motives. Most of the things we do, there's usually a reason behind them. And so that was just kind of a theory I had, that maybe because of that, maybe that's why she got into this operation of baby selling, and maybe it was just to help unwed moms. Maybe she thought, even though it wasn't what they wanted, maybe she thought it was what was best for them. But more importantly, I think it was just selfish, and it was definitely wrong. So anyway, I hope that you're interested in my true crime stories. I'm going to try to do some more. I hope that you have a wonderful day. And if you have any information that you know about this story or other stories, share them in the comments. Please like and subscribe. If you liked the video, like it. Don't like it if you didn't. And subscribe if you want to know when I put out more cookie jar crime videos. Thank you. Bye-bye.